The Lighthouse Secret. Hello, dear listeners. This is Stephen, and welcome back to Mindful Musings. Tonight, I bring you a tale that will chill you to your very core, a story of secrets hidden in plain sight, of darkness masked by light. Settle in, for I'm about to take you through the eyes of Detective Inspector Colin Marsh to the remote coastal village of Inverwick, where nothing is quite as it seems. Chapter 1. A Light That Shouldn't Burn. The morning fog rolled in thick over Inverwick Bay, swallowing the harbour whole. Colin Marsh stood on the weathered dock, watching the mist curl around the pilings like ghostly fingers. He had returned to his childhood village not for nostalgia, but because the Highland police needed a detective willing to accept a posting in this forgotten corner of Scotland. Most found it too quiet, too removed from the action. Colin found it peaceful, a refuge from the chaos of Edinburgh's crime-ridden streets. But peace, as he was learning, was a relative term. The call had come at dawn. Old Fergus MacLeod, the lighthouse keeper for 40 years, had spotted something peculiar. The abandoned lighthouse on Raven's Point, dark for a decade since automation made it obsolete, was burning bright. Not with the proper beacon, mind you, but with an eerie, flickering light that danced in the lantern room like wildfire. Colin drove his battered Land Rover along the coastal road, the cliffs dropping away sharply to his left. The lighthouse emerged from the fog like a spectre, its white tower streaked with rust and neglect. The light Fergus described was gone now, but something about the structure unsettled him. Perhaps it was the way it stood so alone, or perhaps it was the memory of the stories his grandmother used to tell, tales of smugglers and cursed keepers who never left their posts, even in death. He parked at the base of the tower and approached the entrance. The door, which should have been locked and chained, hung slightly ajar. Fresh scratches marred the old padlock, the work of someone with lock-picking skills or simply a good pair of bolt cutters. Colin pushed the door open, and the smell hit him immediately. Salt and decay and something else, something chemical that made his nose wrinkle. The interior was, as he remembered from childhood explorations, a spiral staircase winding upward into darkness. He clicked on his torch and began to climb, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Graffiti marked the lower levels, the usual teenage declarations of love and crude drawings. But as he climbed higher, the markings changed. Symbols appeared, strange geometric patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. Someone had been using this place, and recently. The lantern room was a disaster. Broken glass littered the floor, and the ancient lens mechanism had been damaged, pieces of it scattered about like the aftermath of a violent struggle. But what caught Colin's attention was the makeshift altar in the centre of the room. Candles, dozens of them arranged in a circle. In the middle lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with tight, frantic handwriting. Colin crouched down, careful not to disturb anything. He photographed the scene with his phone, then gingerly picked up the journal. The first entry was dated 3 months ago, written by someone named Iris Pemberton. The name was vaguely familiar, tickling the edges of his memory. As he flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged. Obsessive notes about the village, about its history, about something called the Raven's Debt. A sound from below froze him in place. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, ascending the stairs. Colin stood, his hand instinctively moving to his side where his baton hung. He called out, identifying himself, but received no answer. The footsteps stopped. Then from the darkness below, a woman's voice, trembling with fear or perhaps something else entirely. "Inspector Marsh, you shouldn't be here. The debt must be paid. She should never have come back." Chapter 2. The Woman in the Fog. Through Colin Marsh's eyes, I watched as the tension in that lighthouse grew thick as the morning mist outside. The voice belonged to someone young, someone terrified, and yet there was an edge to it that suggested knowledge, terrible knowledge that weighed heavy on the speaker's conscience. Colin descended the stairs carefully, his torch beam cutting through the gloom. Halfway down, he found her. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in waterproof gear that marked her as someone who spent time on the water. Her red hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes, wide and haunted, reflected his torchlight like a frightened animal. "I'm Detective Inspector Colin Marsh," he said gently, keeping his distance. "What's your name?" "Moira Campbell." She pressed herself against the curved wall. "You need to leave this place. It's not safe. Not for you. Not for anyone who asks questions." Colin noted the way she kept glancing up the stairs, as if expecting something to emerge from the lantern room. "Why don't we step outside, Moira? We can talk there." She shook her head violently. "No, they'll see. They're always watching from the village. That's how they knew she was here. That's how they always know." "Who are they?" Colin asked, but Moira had already started down the stairs, moving with surprising speed. He followed, emerging into the fog-shrouded morning, just in time to see her running toward a small fishing boat moored at the rocky shore below the lighthouse. "Moira, wait," he called, but she was already scrambling aboard, firing up the outboard motor with practiced ease. The boat disappeared into the fog within seconds, leaving Colin standing alone with more questions than answers. He returned to the lighthouse, this time examining it more thoroughly. The ground floor revealed evidence of recent habitation: empty food containers, a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner, and most tellingly a small portable heater. Someone had been living here, hiding here. Iris Pemberton, he assumed. Back in his vehicle, Colin radioed the station. "Jenny, I need you to run a name for me. Iris Pemberton. Check if she's reported missing, if she has any connection to Inverwick." The response came quickly. Jenny Morrison, his civilian assistant, was nothing if not efficient. "Got a hit, sir? Iris Pemberton, age 28, journalist from London. She's been in Inverwick for 3 months, renting a cottage from the Drummond family. No missing person report, but I can make some calls." "Do that, and see what you can find about something called the Raven's Debt. Historical records, local legends, anything." "The Raven's Debt?" Jenny's voice carried a note of surprise. "That's an old story, sir. My gran used to tell it. Supposed to be about a curse on the village, something to do with smugglers back in the 1700s. I always thought it was just a tale to frighten children." Colin thought of the journal, of Moira's terror, of the strange symbols in the lantern room. "Humour me, Jenny. Dig into it." As he drove back to the village, the fog began to lift, revealing Inverwick in all its picturesque glory. Stone cottages clustered around the harbour, fishing boats bobbing at their moorings, the sound of gulls crying overhead. It looked like a postcard, a slice of Highland paradise. But Colin had been a detective long enough to know that pretty facades often hid ugly truths. He stopped at the Drummond estate, a sprawling Victorian house overlooking the bay. Margaret Drummond answered the door herself, a woman in her 60s with iron-grey hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Her expression soured when she saw his identification. "Inspector, I wondered when you'd come calling. It's about that Pemberton woman, isn't it?" "You've heard something?" "Only that she's been skulking about, asking impertinent questions, disturbing people. I told her weeks ago that her lease would not be renewed. The cottage needs repairs." Colin doubted that. "When did you last see her?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. 3 days ago. She came here demanding access to the family archives. I refused, naturally. The Drummonds don't air their history for every curious journalist who wanders into town." "And what history would that be, Mrs. Drummond?" "Nothing that concerns the police, Inspector. Good day." The door closed firmly in his face. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Archives. Stephen here, continuing our journey through Colin Marsh's investigation. As he stood before that closed door, something his grandmother once told him echoed in his mind. In villages like Inverwick, she had said, the past never truly dies. It simply waits in the shadows, patient as stone. Colin returned to the small police station, really just a converted shopfront with 2 desks and a holding cell that had never been used in his tenure. Jenny had coffee, waiting, and a stack of printouts that suggested she had been busy. "Found something interesting, sir." She spread the papers across his desk. The Raven's Debt is more than just a legend. In 1742, a ship called the Raven's Wing wrecked on the rocks near the lighthouse. She was carrying contraband, smuggled goods meant for the village elite. 20 men drowned that night, and the cargo was lost. "Tragic, but hardly unusual for that era," Colin said, scanning the documents. "Here's where it gets strange. According to local records, the lighthouse keeper at the time was a man named Tobias Drummond. He claimed the light was burning that night, but survivors said it was dark. There was an investigation, accusations of deliberate wrecking for salvage, but nothing was ever proven. Drummond died 6 months later under mysterious circumstances, and his family made a fortune shortly after. They became the wealthiest family in Inverwick practically overnight. Colin sat back, connecting the dots. And Margaret Drummond is his descendant. Direct line. The family has owned most of the property in Inverwick for generations. Jenny pulled out another document. But here's the really interesting part. According to parish records, every generation of Drummonds has had at least one death, by drowning or mysterious accident near the lighthouse. The locals call it the Raven's Debt, payment for the family's original sin. Superstition? Maybe, but Iris Pemberton was researching this exact story. I spoke to her editor in London. She was working on an exposé about old Scottish families built on smuggling fortunes. The Drummonds were her primary focus. Colin's phone rang, the harbour master sounding shaken. "Inspector, you need to come down to the dock. We've found something in the water." The something was a body, tangled in fishing nets just off the harbour wall. Female, dressed in jeans and a heavy sweater, her face bloated but still recognisable from the photo Jenny had pulled from her driving licence. Iris Pemberton would write no more exposés. Dr. Angus Reed, who served as the village's only physician and unofficial medical examiner, crouched beside the body on the dock. Dead less than 24 hours, I'd estimate. But Colin, look at this. He pointed to her wrists, which bore deep ligature marks. She was bound before she went in the water. This was no accident. Murder. In Inverwick. Colin felt the weight of it settle over the village like a shroud. Around them, locals had gathered, their faces a mixture of shock and something else he could not quite identify. Fear, perhaps. Or was it relief? Margaret Drummond stood at the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable. When her eyes met Colin's, she turned and walked away, her back straight as a rod. "We need to search her cottage," Colin said to Jenny, "and I want to know everyone who had contact with her in the last week." The cottage was a small stone building on the edge of the village, overlooking the sea. The door was unlocked, which immediately raised Colin's suspicions. Inside, the place had been systematically ransacked. Furniture overturned, books scattered, every drawer pulled out and emptied. But whoever had searched the place had missed something. Colin found it wedged behind the radiator in the bedroom, a USB drive wrapped in waterproof plastic. He pocketed it carefully, then continued his examination. On the wall above the desk, Iris had created an investigation board. Photographs of the Drummond family going back generations, newspaper clippings about accidents and deaths, and at the centre, a copy of an old painting. It showed the lighthouse at Raven's Point, and in the foreground, a group of men loading cargo from a beached ship. The painting was titled The Raven's Debt, 1742. Colin photographed everything, then noticed something else. A series of recent photos taken with a telephoto lens. They showed people meeting at night near the lighthouse. He recognised Margaret Drummond and what looked like the village council members. There were others too, faces he had seen around town but could not yet name. What had Iris stumbled upon? And who had killed her to keep it quiet? Chapter 4. Whispers in the Harbour. As I continue this tale through Colin's eyes, dear listeners, remember that in places like Inverwick, loyalty to community often trumps loyalty to law. It is a lesson Colin was about to learn the hard way. The USB drive contained Iris's research notes, meticulously organised and damning. She had discovered that the Drummond family fortune was indeed built on the wreck of the Raven's Wing, but that was only the beginning. For generations, the Drummonds had controlled Inverwick through a combination of economic power and carefully maintained secrets. According to Iris's notes, the family had evidence of various indiscretions by prominent villagers, information collected over centuries and used to ensure compliance and loyalty. Debts that could never be repaid, mistakes that could never be forgotten. The Raven's debt was not a curse, it was a system of control. But there was more. Recent entries detailed suspicious activities at the lighthouse. meetings held in secret, boats arriving at odd hours, and references to something called the New Covenant. Iris believed the Drummonds were reviving old smuggling operations, using the abandoned lighthouse as a base. Colin called a meeting with the village council, ostensibly to discuss the investigation. They gathered in the community hall, a draughty building that smelled of damp and old wood. Margaret Drummond sat at the head of the table, flanked by Robert Mackay, the harbour master, and Elspeth Gordon, who owned the village shop. "Thank you for coming," Colin began. "I'm investigating the death of Iris Pemberton, and I need your cooperation." "We'll help however we can, Inspector," Robert said, though his eyes avoided Colin's. "Terrible. Tragedy? She seemed like a nice enough lass." "She was murdered," Colin said bluntly. "Bound and thrown into the harbour. This wasn't an accident, and it happened in our village. Someone here knows something." The room fell silent. Elspeth twisted her hands in her lap. Margaret's expression remained impassive. "Inspector," Margaret said finally, "Inverwick is a peaceful place. We don't have murders here. Perhaps this woman brought trouble with her from London. She was asking dangerous questions, stirring up old stories better left buried." "Dangerous to whom?" "To the village's reputation. We rely on tourism, on our image as a quaint Highland village. Stories about curses and smuggling don't help." Colin leaned forward. "I found photographs in her cottage, pictures of people meeting at the lighthouse at night. Would you like to explain that, Mrs. Drummond?" A muscle twitched in Margaret's jaw. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Then you won't mind if I post officers at the lighthouse to see who shows up?" "This is harassment, Inspector. I'll be speaking to your superiors." "Please do. And while you're at it, explain why you were so interested in keeping Iris away from your family archives. What were you afraid she'd find?" The meeting ended badly, with the council members leaving in a huff. Only Robert Mackay remained, lingering by the door. "Inspector, a word in private?" His voice was low, nervous. Outside, away from potential ears, Robert lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "I don't know what Margaret's mixed up in, but I know she's scared. We all are. There's been talk, see, about bringing back the old ways. Some of the younger folks think we should be profiting more from the tourist trade, maybe bending some rules about what we can offer." "What kind of bending?" "Tax-free goods, maybe some duty-free items for the yachts that stop by. Nothing major, just like the old days." Margaret was against it at first, but then something changed. About 4 months ago, she started organising these meetings. Said we needed to protect Inverwick's interests, that outsiders were trying to destroy us. 4 months ago, right when Iris arrived. Did Iris know about this? Robert nodded miserably. She'd been following Margaret, taking pictures. She approached me 2 weeks ago, said she knew what was happening and that she was going to expose it all. Not just the current stuff, but the whole history of the Drummonds and how they've controlled this village for centuries. "And you didn't think to tell the police?" "I'm telling you now, aren't I?" Robert's voice cracked. "Look, Inspector, I'm not proud of what's been happening, but this is my home. These are my people. When Margaret says jump, we jump. That's how it's always been." Colin watched him walk away, shoulders hunched against the wind. The village was closing ranks, protecting their own. But someone had crossed a line from secrecy to murder. That night, Colin stationed himself in his Land Rover on the cliff road overlooking the lighthouse. Jenny had wanted to come, but he had sent her home. This was his investigation, his responsibility. If the New Covenant was meeting tonight, he would be there to see it. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the water. At midnight, the first figure appeared, making their way down the path to the lighthouse. Chapter 5. The New Covenant. Stephen speaking, dear listeners, and I must tell you that what Colin witnessed that night would change everything he thought he knew about his childhood village. Sometimes the monsters we fear are not supernatural at all, but all too human. Colin waited until 5 figures had entered the lighthouse before he made his move. He approached quietly, his torch off, using the moonlight to guide his steps. The door stood open, and voices drifted down from above, echoing in the stone chamber. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate and silent. The voices grew clearer. Margaret Drummond was speaking, her tone sharp and authoritative. "The journalist's death has brought unwanted attention. The inspector is not like his predecessor. He won't look the other way." "Then we make him look the other way." This voice Colin recognised as belonging to Duncan Fraser, who ran the village pub. "The Drummonds have been managing problems for 3 centuries. One nosy detective shouldn't be any different." "It's different because he's one of us," Margaret snapped. "His grandmother was an Inverwick native. He has roots here, which makes him both a problem and an opportunity." Colin had heard enough. He stepped into the lantern room, his presence causing immediate silence. The group turned as one. Margaret, Duncan, Robert, Elspeth, and to his shock, Father McAllister from the village church. "Interesting congregation you have here, Father," Colin said. The priest had the grace to look ashamed. "Inspector, this isn't what you think." "Then explain it to me. Explain why you're holding secret meetings in an abandoned lighthouse. Explain what the new covenant is, and explain what any of this has to do with Iris Pemberton's murder." Margaret stepped forward. "We didn't kill her, Inspector. Whatever you think you know, we are not murderers." "Then who is?" "Because someone tied her up and threw her in the harbour, and all evidence points to this group having motive." "We wanted her to leave, yes," Margaret admitted. "She was threatening to destroy everything we've built here, but we were going to pay her off, convince her to drop the story. Robert was supposed to meet her 3 nights ago to negotiate." Robert nodded. "But she never showed up. I waited at the harbour for 2 hours. When I heard she was dead, I thought—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "You thought one of your fellow conspirators had taken matters into their own hands," Colin finished. "So, what is the new covenant?" Father McAllister spoke up. "It's an agreement, Inspector. Between the old families of Inverwick. We pool our resources, support each other, and yes, occasionally bend the rules to keep the village prosperous. Nothing violent, nothing truly illegal. Just survival in a modern world that's forgotten places like this." "And the smuggling?" "Exaggerated," Duncan said. "We bring in some duty-free goods for the yachts, that's all. Rich tourists pay well for discretion. The money supports the village, pays for things the council budget can't cover." Colin looked at each of them in turn. They were not criminals in the traditional sense, just desperate people trying to hold on to a way of life that was slipping away. But desperation led to poor decisions and sometimes to tragedy. Did Iris have any other enemies? Anyone outside this group who might have wanted her dead? The group exchanged glances. Finally, Elspeth spoke. "There was a man who came looking for her about a week ago. English accent, well-dressed, drove a fancy car. He seemed angry, demanding to know where she was staying. I told him I didn't know." "Did he give a name?" "No, but he left a card with the pub. Duncan, do you still have it?" Duncan pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card. Colin's torch beam illuminated the name. Marcus Pemberton, investment banker, London. Her husband, Jenny's research had mentioned a marriage, recent and apparently troubled. Colin's radio crackled, Jenny's voice urgent and frightened. "Sir, you need to come to the station now. Someone's broken in. They were looking for something specific. And sir, I found something else, in the evidence locker. The rope used to bind Iris Pemberton, it has a tag on it. It came from a yacht, a very expensive yacht that's currently moored in our harbour." Colin ran for his Land Rover, leaving the new covenant behind. Whatever their sins, he was increasingly certain they were not murderers. But someone was, someone with connections and resources, someone who had followed Iris to Inverwick. The yacht in question was a sleek 40-footer called the Raven's Wing, the same name as the doomed smuggling vessel from 1742. Colin found that coincidence deeply troubling. Chapter 6. Blood on the Water. As Colin approached the harbour, I watched through his eyes with growing dread, dear listeners. The yacht bobbed gently at its mooring, its windows dark, no sign of life aboard. But Colin's instincts, honed by years of police work, screamed danger. He called for backup, though the nearest officers were 40 minutes away in Fort William. Jenny arrived first, her face pale in the streetlights. "I checked the harbour master's records," she said. "The Raven's Wing docked 4 days ago. Owner listed as M. Pemberton. It has to be the husband. "Stay here," Colin ordered. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, call it in." He approached the yacht cautiously, noting the gangplank was down. "Mr. Pemberton, this is Detective Inspector Marsh. I need to speak with you about your wife." Silence. Then from below deck, a crash and a muffled curse. Colin boarded, his hand on his baton. The yacht's interior was luxurious, all polished wood and leather. Signs of recent occupation were everywhere, glasses in the sink, clothes draped over furniture, but also signs of distress, broken items, papers scattered across a table. He found Marcus Pemberton in the main cabin, slumped in a chair with an empty whiskey bottle at his feet. The man looked like he had not slept in days, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "She's really dead then," Marcus said, his words slurred. "I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she was just hiding from me." "Mr. Pemberton, I need to ask you some questions." "I didn't kill her." Marcus laughed bitterly. "I know that's what you think, but I didn't. I loved her in my own terrible way. I came here to bring her home, to convince her to give up this insane story she was chasing." "The story about the Drummonds?" "Among others. Iris was obsessed with exposing old families, showing how their fortunes were built on blood and crime. It was personal for her, you see. Her own family was destroyed by people like the Drummonds, powerful people who covered up their crimes for generations." Colin sat down across from him. "Tell me what happened." Marcus poured himself another drink with shaking hands. "We fought constantly about her work. She took too many risks, made too many enemies. 3 months ago, she said she was coming to Scotland for a story. I begged her not to go, but Iris never listened to anyone. So I followed her, kept my distance, watched from the yacht. I saw her meeting with people, photographing things she shouldn't, and I saw them watching her back." "The Drummonds?" "Not just them. There was someone else, someone I couldn't identify. They followed her several times, always keeping to the shadows. I tried to warn Iris, but she wouldn't take my calls. She'd filed for divorce, you see, told me I was trying to control her." "When did you last see your wife alive?" 3 nights ago. She came to the yacht angry, saying I needed to leave Inverwick or I'd ruin everything. We argued. She left around 10 o'clock. That's the last time I saw her." His voice broke. "I should have followed her, made sure she got home safe, but I was drunk and angry and I let her go." Colin's radio crackled again. Jenny's voice tight with tension. "Sir, Moira Campbell just turned up at the station. She says she has information about the murder. She says she saw who did it. Keep her there. I'm on my way." Moira sat in the station's small interview room, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked even more frightened than she had at the lighthouse, if that was possible. "Tell me what you saw," Colin said gently. "I fish at night sometimes when I can't sleep. 3 nights ago, I was out on the water near the harbour. I saw Miss Pemberton walking along the dock, and I saw someone following her. They came up behind her fast, grabbed her. There was a struggle, and then she went still. They dragged her to the edge and pushed her in." "Did you see who it was?" Moira nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to believe it. They've been good to this village, given jobs to people who needed them. But I know what I saw." "Who, Moira? Who did you see?" "It was young James Drummond, Margaret's nephew. He's been working as her assistant, managing the family's properties. I saw his face clear as day when he turned toward the streetlight." Colin felt something cold settle in his stomach. James Drummond, aged 25, had always seemed quiet and unassuming. He lived in a flat above the family's real estate office, rarely socialized, kept to himself. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I'm a Campbell, Inspector. Do you know what that means in this village? We're fishers. We're nobody. The Drummonds own half the property here, including the building my family has lived in for 4 generations. If I accuse James, if I'm wrong, we lose everything. And if I'm right, we still might lose everything." But she had come forward anyway, and that took courage. Colin left Jenny with Moira and drove to the Drummond estate. It was time to end this, time to bring a killer to justice, regardless of name or family. Chapter 7. The Drummond Legacy. Through Colin's eyes, I witnessed the confrontation that would shake Inverwick to its foundations. The Drummond estate loomed in the darkness, its windows glowing with warm light that seemed to mock the coldness of the crimes committed in its name. Margaret Drummond answered the door herself, still dressed despite the late hour. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Colin's expression. "Inspector, this is highly irregular." "Where is James?" "My nephew. In his flat, I assume." "Why?" "I have a witness who places him at the scene of Iris Pemberton's murder. I need to bring him in for questioning." For the first time since Colin had known her, Margaret Drummond's composure cracked. "No, that's impossible. James wouldn't. He couldn't." "Nevertheless, I need to speak with him. You can accompany us to the station if you wish." "He's not there." The voice came from behind Margaret. A young man stepped into the light, tall and thin with the Drummond features, aristocratic cheekbones and dark eyes that held a terrible knowledge. "I'm here, Inspector. I've been waiting for you." James Drummond looked nothing like a killer. He looked exhausted, haunted, like a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long. "James, don't say anything," Margaret commanded. "I'll call our solicitor." "No, Aunt Margaret, it's time." James turned to Colin. "I didn't kill Iris Pemberton, but I know who did, and I know why. May I show you something?" Against his better judgment, Colin followed James through the estate to a wing he had never seen. A library filled with ancient books and documents. James pulled out a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age. "This is the true accounting of the Drummond fortune," James said. "Everything Iris suspected was true. We built our wealth on the cargo from the Raven's Wing. Tobias Drummond deliberately extinguished the lighthouse that night, wrecked the ship, and salvaged the goods. 20 men died so our family could prosper." "That was nearly 300 years ago," Colin said. "But the pattern continued. Every generation we've profited from others' misfortunes. We've used our power to control this village, to ensure our position. And when people threatened to expose us, we silenced them. Not with murder, usually. Just economic pressure, social ostracism, the kind of violence that doesn't leave bruises." Margaret had gone pale. "James, what are you doing?" "I'm ending it, Aunt. The cycle stops with me." He turned back to Colin. "Iris came to me 6 weeks ago. She showed me what she'd found, asked me to confirm it, and I did. I was tired of living with the guilt, tired of being part of a family built on suffering. I gave her access to everything, all our records, all our secrets." "You betrayed your family," Margaret whispered. "I saved my soul. But I also signed Iris's death warrant. I told her to be careful, that once the article was published, she should leave Scotland immediately. But she wanted more. She wanted to prove the new covenant was continuing the old traditions, that we were still profiting from illegal activities." "And someone found out she had the evidence," Colin said. James nodded. 3 nights ago, I got a call from Iris. She was terrified, said someone had broken into her cottage, that she was going to hide the evidence and then leave town immediately. She asked me to meet her at the harbour, to help her get safely to her husband's yacht. But when I got there, she was already dead. Someone had gotten to her first. "Why didn't you report it?" "Because I'm a coward, Inspector. I saw her body in the water, and I ran. I've been hiding here ever since, trying to decide what to do." Colin studied the young man. Every instinct told him James was telling the truth, but that left the question. If not James, then who? "The evidence Iris hid, do you know where it is?" "She said something about the place where the debt began. I thought she meant the lighthouse, but I searched it and found nothing." The place where the debt began. Colin's mind raced through the history he had learned. The Raven's Wing had wrecked on the rocks near the lighthouse, but the salvaged cargo would have been stored somewhere, hidden from authorities. "The old smuggler's caves," he said suddenly. "Below the lighthouse, accessible only at low tide. That's where they would have stored the contraband." James's eyes widened. Of course, the family sealed them decades ago, but Iris could have found a way in. She was resourceful like that. "Show me." They drove to the lighthouse in Colin's Land Rover, Margaret insisting on coming despite Colin's objections. The tide was out, exposing the rocky shore and, as James had promised, a narrow opening in the cliff face below the lighthouse. Colin shone his torch into the darkness. The cave extended back into the cliff, and he could see evidence of old wooden supports, the remnants of a more structured hiding place. "I'll go first," he said. "Stay here." "No." James pushed past him. "This is my family's sin to face." The cave was larger than Colin expected, opening into a natural chamber that had been modified over the centuries. Old crates rotted in corners, and the walls bore marks of long-ago cargo. But in the centre of the chamber, placed on a raised stone that might once have served as an altar, sat a modern waterproof case. James reached for it, but Colin stopped him. "Evidence. Don't touch it." He photographed the scene, then carefully opened the case. Inside were documents, USB drives, and a journal similar to the one he had found in the lighthouse. But there was something else, a note, written in Iris's handwriting, dated the night of her death. "If you're reading this, I'm likely dead. The person who has been helping me is not who they claim to be. I discovered tonight that my source has been playing both sides, feeding me information while also alerting the Drummonds to my investigation. The person I trusted most in Inverwick is the one who will kill me. Father McAllister is not a priest. He is Marcus's business partner, sent to monitor me and ensure I didn't expose too much. When I confronted him tonight, he—" The note ended there, torn off as if interrupted. Colin felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Chapter 8. The False Shepherd. Stephen here, dear listeners, and I must confess that even through Colin's experienced eyes, the depth of this deception was shocking. Father McAllister, the spiritual shepherd of Inverwick, was a wolf in clerical clothing. Colin emerged from the cave to find Jenny had arrived with backup from Fort William. He handed her the evidence case. "Process this immediately, and put out an alert for Father McAllister. I want him found now." "The priest." Jenny's shock was evident. "Sir, are you certain?" "Iris's own words. He's not who he claims to be." Margaret Drummond had heard everything. She looked decades older, the weight of her family's history finally crushing her aristocratic bearing. "Father McAllister arrived in Inverwick 8 months ago. The Archdiocese sent him to replace Father Murray after his retirement. He seemed so genuine, so committed to the community." "He played everyone," Colin said bitterly, "including me." They drove to the church, a small stone building overlooking the bay. The rectory next door was dark, empty. Father McAllister, or whoever he really was, had fled, but he had not fled far. Colin's radio crackled with a report from the harbour master. "Inspector, the yacht Raven's Wing is casting off. I told them they needed clearance, but they're ignoring me." Colin ran for his Land Rover, racing back to the harbour. The yacht was already pulling away from the dock, its engines growling as it turned toward open water. On deck, Colin could see 2 figures, one tall and commanding, the other struggling. Iris Pemberton was fighting for his life. "He's got the husband," Jenny said, lowering her binoculars. "McAllister must be trying to silence him too." Colin called the Coast Guard, but the nearest vessel was hours away. The yacht was fast, built for speed, and once it reached international waters, McAllister would be beyond their reach, unless someone stopped him. Robert Mackay appeared at Colin's elbow. "My boat's faster than that yacht, Inspector. I can catch him." "This isn't your fight, Robert." "The hell it isn't. I'm the harbour master, and no one commits murder in my harbour and escapes on my watch. Besides, I owe it to that lass. We all do, for not protecting her when she needed it." They boarded Robert's fishing boat, a sturdy vessel with engines that roared to life with surprising power. "Coast Guard refit," Robert explained. "For search and rescue, she can move when she needs to." They cut through the dark water, the yacht's lights visible ahead. Colin tried the radio, hailing the Raven's Wing, but got no response. Through the darkness, he could hear shouting, the sounds of a struggle. Robert brought the fishing boat alongside the yacht with practiced skill. Colin jumped across, landing on the deck just as Father McAllister emerged from below, dragging Marcus with him. The so-called priest had a knife pressed to Marcus's throat. "Stay back, Inspector," McAllister warned. His accent had changed, the soft Highland lilt replaced by crisp English tones. "I don't want to kill anyone else, but I will if you force my hand." "It's over," Colin said, keeping his voice calm. "We found Iris's evidence. We know you're not a priest. We know you killed her." McAllister laughed, a sound devoid of humour. You know nothing. Yes, I killed Iris Pemberton, but not for the reasons you think. This wasn't about the Drummonds or their petty smuggling operation. This was about protecting something much larger. Then tell me, help me understand. Iris was my business partner's wife, but she was also my problem. Marcus and I run an investment firm that manages assets for some very wealthy, very private clients. Clients who do not appreciate scrutiny. Iris was investigating the Drummonds, yes. But she stumbled onto something else. Patterns of money laundering that led back to our firm. So, you came here to stop her, Colin said, edging closer. I came to reason with her. I tried everything. Bribes, threats, appeals to her loyalty to Marcus. But she wouldn't listen. She said the truth mattered more than money, more than safety. So noble, so foolish. McAllister's hand tightened, on the knife. 3 nights ago, I followed her to the harbour. We argued. She threatened to expose not just the Drummonds, but our entire operation. I couldn't allow that. Our clients would have killed us both. So, you tied her up and drowned her. It was supposed to look like an accident, a tragic drowning. But then you started digging, and Marcus started falling apart, and the whole thing spiraled out of control. McAllister looked genuinely regretful. I never wanted to be a killer, Inspector. I'm a businessman, but sometimes business requires difficult decisions. Let Marcus go. Whatever you've done, it will only get worse if you hurt him. Worse for whom? I'm already ruined. But I can still escape, start over somewhere they'll never find me, and Marcus here is my ticket out. The yacht lurched suddenly, struck by a wave. McAllister stumbled and Marcus broke free, throwing himself overboard. Colin lunged forward, tackling the false priest before he could recover. They struggled on the deck, the knife clattering away. McAllister was stronger than he looked, fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. But Colin had trained for this, had dealt with violent suspects before. He managed to get McAllister face down, cuffing his hands behind his back. Chapter 9. Justice and Judgment. Through Colin's eyes I saw Inverwick begin to heal, though the scars would remain for generations. The arrest of Father McAllister, whose real name was Simon Hartley, sent shockwaves through the village and beyond. Marcus Pemberton, rescued from the cold harbour waters by Robert Mackay, sat in Colin's office wrapped in blankets, his face haunted by more than physical cold. I never knew, he said hoarsely. Simon was my business partner for 5 years. We built the firm together, or so I thought. I never suspected he was using it to launder money for criminals. When Iris started investigating old money families, I thought it was just another of her crusades. I didn't realise she had found the connection to our firm. The evidence she collected will help us dismantle the operation, Colin assured him. She didn't die for nothing. But she died because of me, because I brought that monster into her life. Marcus's hands shook. I should have listened to her concerns about Simon. She always said there was something off about him, something false. But he made us so much money, and I was too greedy to look too closely. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Simon Hartley's crimes. He had indeed posed as a priest, using the position to move freely through communities, gathering information for his criminal clients. Inverwick was not his first posting, and Iris was not his first victim, though she was the first he had killed directly. The real Father McAllister, it turned out, had been paid handsomely to take an extended sabbatical, unaware that his identity was being stolen. The Archdiocese was horrified and cooperative, helping to untangle the deception. As for the new covenant, Colin faced a difficult decision. Technically, they had committed crimes, tax evasion and smuggling, albeit on a small scale, but they were also victims in their own way, manipulated by fear and tradition. He called a meeting at the community hall, the entire village in attendance. Margaret Drummond sat in the front row, diminished but not broken, young James beside her with his hand on her shoulder. I've reviewed all the evidence, Colin began. The murder of Iris Pemberton was committed by Simon Hartley, acting alone to protect his criminal enterprise. However, the investigation also revealed other illegal activities within this community. A murmur ran through the crowd. Colin held up his hand for silence. I'm not here to destroy Inverwick. This is my home too, my family's home for generations. But I cannot ignore what I've learned. The New Covenant's activities, while minor compared to Hartley's crimes, were still illegal. Therefore, I'm making the following recommendation to the Crown Prosecution Service. He paused, meeting Margaret's eyes. I'm recommending suspended sentences and community service for those involved, contingent on immediate cessation of all illegal activities and full cooperation with tax authorities. The Drummond family archives will be donated to the National Archives of Scotland, where historians can properly document this region's history, both noble and ignoble. Margaret stood slowly. Inspector, the Drummond family has controlled those records for 3 centuries, and used them to control this village for just as long. That ends now. Inverwick deserves to know its true history, not the sanitized version your family has maintained. To his surprise, it was James who spoke next. He's right, Aunt Margaret. We've been the keepers of shame for too long. It's time to let it go, to let the village heal. Margaret looked around the room at faces both supportive and accusing. Finally she nodded. Very well, Inspector. The archives are yours, and the New Covenant is hereby dissolved. The tension in the room broke. People began talking, some angry, some relieved. Colin noticed Moira Campbell in the back, and when their eyes met, she smiled tentatively. It was the courage of people like her, he thought, that would rebuild this community. Over the following weeks, Colin worked with archivists from Edinburgh to catalogue the Drummond papers. The story they told was both worse and more human than the legend suggested. Yes, Tobias Drummond had wrecked the Raven's Wing, but he had been coerced by powerful smugglers who threatened his family. The fortune built on that tragedy had been maintained through a combination of shrewd business and moral compromise, but there were also stories of Drummonds who had tried to do good, who had used their wealth to help the village during hard times, who had struggled with the weight of their ancestors' sins. It was a complicated legacy, neither wholly evil nor wholly noble. Iris's article was published posthumously, carefully edited by her editor to focus on the historical aspects, and Simon Hartley's crimes rather than the current community. Marcus funded a scholarship in her name for investigative journalists, a small attempt at redemption. Chapter 10. Debts Paid. Dear listeners, as I bring you to the conclusion of this tale through Colin's eyes, remember that justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about understanding, about breaking cycles of pain and secrecy that have endured for far too long. The lighthouse at Ravens Point was renovated and turned into a museum, documenting the history of smuggling and shipwrecks along the Scottish coast. The opening ceremony drew crowds from across the Highlands, and Colin stood at the back, watching as Margaret Drummond cut the ribbon with hands that shook only slightly. The first exhibit told the story of the Raven's Wing, complete with artefacts recovered from the wreck site and copies of Tobias Drummond's confession, hidden in the family archives for centuries. It was a raw, honest accounting of greed and consequences, of how one night's decisions could echo through generations. Moira Campbell had been hired as the museum's curator, her knowledge of local history and fishing traditions proving invaluable. She was giving tours now, her voice steady and proud as she explained the exhibits to wide-eyed tourists. Inspector Marsh. Colin turned to find Robert Mackay approaching, looking uncomfortable in a suit rather than his usual fishing gear. Robert, good to see you. I wanted to thank you for giving us a chance to make things right. I know we didn't deserve it. Everyone deserves a chance to choose better, Colin said. What you do with that chance is what matters. Robert nodded, then gestured to the harbour visible through the museum windows. I've been working with the Coast Guard, legitimately now. We're setting up a proper maritime rescue service for the region. Seems fitting, given our history. It was fitting, the village that had once profited from shipwrecks now working to prevent them. Jenny approached with 2 cups of tea. Sir, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. James Drummond waited near the lighthouse itself, gazing up at the newly restored beacon. It was lit now, a proper navigational aid, guiding ships safely past the rocks that had claimed so many. It's beautiful, James said quietly. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of the Drummond legacy. Not for what we were, but for what we're becoming. And what's that? Honest, accountable, part of the community rather than above it. James smiled slightly. I've enrolled in university, studying history. I'm going to spend my life documenting the truth, making sure stories like ours are remembered properly, so the mistakes aren't repeated. Colin clasped his shoulder. Iris would have liked that. I hope so. I think about her often, about her courage in pursuing the truth despite the costs. She changed this village, changed my life. The least I can do is honour her memory. As the sun set over Inverwick Bay, Colin found himself at peace for the first time since returning home. The village was not perfect, would likely never be perfect, but it was trying. That was all anyone could ask. He walked down to the harbour, watching the fishing boats return with their daily catch. The Raven's debt, that ancient curse, had been paid not in drownings or mysterious accidents, but in truth and accountability. The ghosts of the past could finally rest. Marcus Pemberton's yacht was gone, sailed away the day after the trial ended. He had sent Colin a letter, brief and to the point. Thank you for finding Iris's killer. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her memory. The firm has been dissolved, and I'm cooperating fully with authorities to prosecute our criminal clients. It won't bring her back, but perhaps it will prevent others from suffering as she did. Colin heard footsteps on the dock behind him, and turned to find Moira approaching. The museum closed for the day, she said, coming to stand beside him. I never properly thanked you for believing me when I came forward. That took courage I didn't know you had. You're the courageous one. You risked everything to tell the truth. We both did, she smiled. The village is talking, you know, wondering if the detective inspector might finally settle down, maybe with a nice local girl who understands the importance of truth. Colin felt himself flush. Are they now? Just village gossip, but sometimes gossip points to truth. Moira's eyes held a warmth that made his heart beat faster. Would you like to have dinner sometime, Inspector? Somewhere we can talk about things other than murder and family curses. I'd like that very much. As they walked back toward the village together, Colin thought about his grandmother's words, about the past never truly dying. She had been right, but incomplete. The past did not die, but it could be transformed, redeemed through the choices of the present. Inverwick would always carry the weight of the Raven's debt, but it no longer had to be crushed by it. The light at Raven's Point burned bright and true, a beacon not just for ships, but for a community finding its way forward. And that, dear listeners, is where I leave Colin Marsh and the village of Inverwick. The mystery is solved, justice has been served, and a new chapter begins. This is Stephen, signing off from Mindful Musings. Remember, the truth may be painful, but it is always worth pursuing. The debts we owe to the past can only be paid through honesty in the present and hope for the future. Until next time, may your own lights burn bright and true. The end.